Well, thank you, Mr. Chairman, and I appreciate the opportunity to talk about this important topic today. And thank you to all our panelists for joining us today to go through this important issue. Americans depend on a robust healthcare system in the United States, and we're grateful to the countless doctors and nurses who care for us in times of sickness and great difficulty. We've come to expect that when we're facing a healthcare crisis, healthcare providers will be ready to assist us. Unfortunately, many Americans are now facing a drug shortage crisis, causing delays in treatment that produces unnecessary hardships and cost. This can be especially devastating to folks living in rural parts of our country. In my district in Kansas, a large part of our population lives outside of a major metropolitan area, relying on community and critical access hospitals for care. When the medical supply chain breaks down, too often it's the rural Kansans I represent who are at the end of the line and are impacted the most. Unfortunately, the problems don't just stem from one part of our system. An over-reliance on foreign countries like China and India, complex supply chains and distribution processes, and unsustainable Medicare reimbursements aren't just hurting drug manufacturers, they're hurting Americans who rely on those medicines. A particular area of concern, as we've talked about before, is the amount of active pharmaceutical ingredients, or API, that's produced in China. Kansans have rightfully shared their concerns with me about relying so heavily on China to produce these critical medicines that we rely on every day. And it's not just specialty drugs or uncommon medicines. It's products like ibuprofen, hydrocortisone, and acetaminophen. When Americans are reaching for a common over-the-counter medicine to relieve a headache or a backache, they're more likely opening a pill bottle with drugs from China. While this has been a growing problem for a while, the COVID-19 pandemic highlighted the awareness and exposed the potential pitfalls of seeding our critical medical manufacturing processes overseas. Now with drug shortages throughout the country, we're reaping the detriments of depending on China and others for our pharmaceuticals. Dr. Schondemeyer, you talked a lot earlier, and I wanted to follow up on a couple of things that you'd mentioned. Typically or historically, how much finished product and API has been produced domestically, kind of as a percentage or component versus internationally?
Well, 30 years ago, the majority of API was made in the U.S., and finished dosage forms were made in the U.S. But over the last 30 years or so, that's moved to the Asian market. Just like almost all consumer goods, if you listen to Mr. Wonderful on Shark Tank, he'll say, I'm going to take that product and I'm going to move it to Asia and decrease your cost of production. That's happened in pharmaceuticals too, but we haven't paid attention to the quality and other ramifications of that, and now we're paying the price for that we haven't kept the quality up when we did that.
And how open or how available is it for the FDA to test and inspect and make sure that there's good quality safe in that development in a country like China or India or someplace else?
Well, the first thing that I'm sure you as members of Congress realize that when we send a person from the FDA, an official representative of our government, to China, we have to notify China ahead of time that they're coming and the purpose of their visit. And so suddenly, the factory gets whitewashed and all of the problems they might have get cleaned up, and you don't find many problems when you go inspect it. And secondly, just the cost and time and budget for FDA to inspect these facilities exceeds the resources that they have anyway. So we really can't regulate factories in China like we would factories in Canada or Mexico or the U.S. Because of time and cost, and because of the government helping those companies hide things they don't want people to see.
And I'm just so glad that y'all have been here talking through this at this hearing. It's as it really became exposed during COVID-19, the risk that we are at for the country, and we saw countries, as mentioned earlier, India threatened to not release pharmaceuticals and drugs to help us, and we saw the similar comments coming out of China, more for some of the equipment and manufacturing that they made there. So it highlights how important it is to bring that back to the United States. So thank you, and I yield back, Mr. Chairman.